So this is objective 57, which is factor by grouping. If you notice on our list of factoring rules, generally we go from top to bottom when we solve a factoring problem. And that we had just talked about factoring out a greatest common factor, which was objective 56. Well, sequentially, this list makes sense in terms of trying to solve a factoring problem, but in terms of introducing material, it now makes sense to talk about factor by grouping, because this is really an extension of the greatest common factor rule. We're also going to need this in order to do some trinomial work. So let's look at what the factor by grouping method is. Factor by grouping is usually 4 or more terms. So if you see 4 or more terms in a problem, you'll recognize that, hey, this is supposed to be a factor by grouping thing. So an example of that would be a problem that looks like this. X squared plus 2x minus xy minus 2y. So as I start this factoring problem, I recognize that I should try to factor out a greatest common factor first. But there isn't a greatest common factor among all these 4 terms. There is a common factor with the first 3 in that they have a common factor of x. But because I see I have 4 terms, that indicates to me that I'm going to try this factor by grouping method. So when you say factor by grouping, what you do is you create groups of things that have a common factor in them. Okay? Now make sure you include that minus sign with this xy term. It's really important that that sign goes there. Okay? So when you make your groups, include the minus sign. Okay, now from my first parentheses here, I'm going to take out a common factor. And the common factor there is an x. As I look at my second set of parentheses, I want to consider 2 things. The first is that I want to take out a common factor. The second is that I want to make that common factor such that when I'm done, I get the same parentheses I got in my first group. So as I look, I could pull out a positive y here. But that would leave me with a negative x and a minus 2. So that doesn't really do much for me. I note that this is very close. This parentheses is very close to the first one, but not exactly the same. So I'm going to try, instead of taking out a positive y, I'm going to take out a negative y. That leaves me with a positive x term and then a positive 2, which is great, because now I can continue to factor this problem by using our greatest common factor method. These both have a common factor of x plus 2. So I can factor out the x plus 2 and be left with the x minus y. So our final answer is x plus 2 times x minus y.